Wake up. Time is short. What are you missing? Did you forget something? Something important? Are you too caught up in the hustle and bustle of life? Too occupied with dead-end mundane relationships? Too busy with the numbing routine of work and business? Too stressed out to notice that your life has no beauty, no poetry, no love? Or are you caught in the trap of poverty, feeling bitter with the struggle to make ends meet, exhausted and strung out by a life of misery? Or just lonely, depressed, and sad? That's not the way life is supposed to be, is it? Do you think your life would be better if you had more money? A better job, a better house, your own car, an overfed body, and an undernourished soul? Do you enjoy being a member of the herd? Are you happy with the choices you have made? Our materialistic society has produced many great works, but now big corporations have become more important than people. Is being a cog in the gears of progress really satisfying? All the great civilizations of the past lie in ruins. Do we really think ours is any different? Is there something in our human nature that materialistic civilization fails to nourish? Do you ever feel that you are trapped? Trapped in a jail without walls, a prison camp without fences? Our cars and roads are built for speed, but how much time do we spend in them, stuck in traffic? Faster, ever faster, do more with less, and feed the insatiable appetite of greed and profit. Work harder, faster, sacrifice yourself on the altar of material progress. Trapped in a speeding metal cell on a ride to nowhere. More bars than a prison house. The polished windows reflect your alienation, your pain. Always in a crowd, but always alone. Herded like cattle through underground tunnels. Trapped in the matrix, waiting for a future that never arrives. There has to be a way out. A way back to our original nature. A path that leads back to the light.
Have the stupid viewers left yet?
Yeah, as usual, they tuned out in the middle.
Looks like you're the only one left. Sit down. We have a lot to talk about. There isn't much time. Time always works against us. You're trapped in the matrix, an artificial world of lies, false arbitrary names, and deceptive symbols. A world apparently unbounded, but painfully finite. A prison without walls. Ruled by a faceless hierarchy. Chained to a ruthless treadmill of economic slavery. A prison of consciousness, formed by forced education and enforced by illusory media dreams of materialistic perfection. You can believe the lies and remain asleep, or you can wake up and see the reality. You can escape the matrix. We know the way to freedom, but there isn't much time. The singularity is coming soon. The singularity is a wave in time, a tsunami of change. Have you noticed that change is increasing? The rate of change is increasing exponentially. Soon it will become impossible to handle. People will lose their minds. Actually, it's happening already. Remember the story of the Tower of Babel? They were trying to enjoy heaven without God. Just like our materialistic society today, it was a previous version of the Matrix. The Tower of Babel was the last singularity. It destroyed their civilization. That's why there are no history books older than 5,000 years. Everything changed. In 2012, the sun lines up with the center of the galaxy exactly at the winter solstice. This only happens once every 27,000 years. It's the end of a major Mayan calendar cycle, also the end of a major Vedic calendar cycle. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Nobody does. But we do know that for a time, the rate of change will become virtually infinite. In other words, everything will change all at once. The matrix will crash. There's only one way to deal with it. You have to escape the matrix. You're suffering because you're an eternal spiritual being, trapped in a changing material body, in a material world where everything is temporary. Change your consciousness now, while there's still time. Listen to us. We know the way out of the matrix. You can't escape just by taking a pill. I wish it was that easy. But this is not just another Hollywood media fantasy. This is the real thing. You have to work out your freedom for yourself. Your first step to that freedom is knowledge. We can give you that knowledge. You have to assimilate and apply it. Join us and learn the truth.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Our course is called 2012. Matrix Singularity. Okay, what does that mean? In 2012 is the end of the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar lasts for millions of years. But on December 21st, 2012, that's the end. Of course, it's not really the end of time, but it's the end of a major cycle. The sun aligns with the center of the galaxy, exactly on the winter solstice. This only happens every 27,000 years. So it's a big event, a major event. Not only the Mayan calendar, also the Vedic calendar, and the Tibetan calendar called Kalachakra. They all end a major cycle right around the same time. So all the ancient calendars are in agreement that we are at the end of a major cycle. This is something that only happens
Esto es algo
in
que
thousands of years.
solo sucede cada miles de años.
So because our history only goes back 5,000 years in the West,
La historia solo va 5,000 años atrás. En el
we don't have
continente.
much information on
No
these
tenemos
things.
mucha información en estas cosas.
But why does our history only go back 5,000
¿Por
years?
qué es que nuestra historia solo tiene 5,000 años?
Because 5,000 years ago was another
5,000
time
años
very similar to this.
hubo un tiempo muy similar a este.
What happens at the end of a historical cycle?
¿Qué pasa al fin de un periodo histórico?
Basically, everything changes.
Básicamente todo cambia.
This is what's called
Esto es lo que se le llama
a logarithmic chart.
una gráfica logarítmica.
This is millions
Estos son
of people.
millones de gente.
This is the use of mass inventions.
Este es el uso de invenciones masivas.
For example, here's electricity,
Electricidad,
telephone,
teléfono,
radio,
radio,
television,
televisión,
PC,
la PC,
cell phone, and
teléfono celular
internet.
y el internet.
And this is the year. As we see,
Como vemos,
in the beginning of mass inventions,
de las invenciones masivas
there were only a few users.
solo había unos cuantos usuarios,
To the minus 24th.
a la menos 24.
But as technology advances more and more
Conforme avanza la tecnología,
and more people become involved.
más y más gente se involucra.
And now with the internet, almost everybody is involved.
Con el internet casi todos están involucrados,
Billions of people.
billones de gente.
So what does this mean?
¿Qué significa esto?
This means that the changes that are happening are affecting more and more
Que
people.
los cambios que suceden afectan a más
This
gente.
means that change itself is
El
increasing.
cambio en sí mismo está incrementándose.
Change is accelerating.
El cambio se está acelerando.
What we're seeing here is the evolution of computer data
La
storage.
evolución del almacenamiento en computadora.
From the drum back in the 1950s
Se usaba el tambor,
to the first hard drives, hard disks,
primeros discos duros,
and up to the present, almost to the present day.
hasta casi el presente día,
I think if we saw it to the present day, we would see it go right off the chart.
que se ve fuera de la gráfica. Si
Because
vemos el día de hoy,
the data storage is one area where change
el almacenamiento
is
de datos
increasing very, very
es un
rapidly.
área en la cual se incrementa muy rápidamente el
From
cambio.
1950 to 2000,
1950 al 2000,
in 50 years,
en 50 años,
the amount of information we can store
la cantidad
on
de
a
información que
disk
podemos almacenar
has increased 1 billion times.
se ha incrementado 1 billón de veces.
This means the amount of computing power available for $1,000.
La capacidad de procesamiento computacional disponible por $1,000.
So in terms of the amount of computing power you could buy for $1,000 in the year
Que uno
2000,
podría comprar con $1,000 en el 2000,
a century ago, it was 10 to the minus fifth.
100 años era 10 a la menos 5.
So look at the trend.
O sea que vean,
Remember,
tendencia.
this is an exponential chart.
Es una gráfica
It's not a linear chart.
no es lineal.
So every line is a power of 10.
Es una potencia de 10.
And look at how the chart is going.
Y vean cómo se dirige esta gráfica.
The acceleration is itself accelerating.
La aceleración está a sí misma acelerándose.
Now, this has led some people to forecast
Esto ha llevado a algunas personas
that if this trend
a
continues,
predecir que si esta tendencia continúa,
by 2020,
para el 2020,
we'll have computers for $1,000
computadoras por
with
$1,000
essentially the capacity of a human brain.
con la capacidad cerebral de un ser humano.
That doesn't say they'll be as smart as a human being,
No tan
but they'll
inteligentes
have
como
the
un
data
ser humano,
throughput capacity
pero
of a
que
human
puedan
being.
procesar tal cantidad de información.
What would happen if computers became that
¿Qué
powerful?
pasaría si las computadoras fueran así de poderosas?
What has happened already
¿Qué ha pasado
in the last 50
en
years?
los últimos 50 años?
Computers changed everything.
Las computadoras cambiaron todo.
If this trend continues,
Esta tendencia continúa.
they're going to keep changing everything
Van a continuar cambiando
faster
todo,
and faster and
más
faster.
y más rápido.
In every field, the same
En todas las áreas
thing is
se ve
going
el
on.
mismo patrón. Hay muchas gráficas similares.
This is brain scanning speed.
Esta es la velocidad de escaneo del cerebro.
Now this is a logarithmic chart.
Es una gráfica logarítmica.
So what this curve means
Que esta curva significa
is that the rate of change is accelerating.
la proporción de cambio se está acelerando.
It's not just
No es
that the rate of change is getting
solo
faster,
que está aumentando el cambio,
but the rate of increase is also
pero
accelerating.
también como
It's
la
a
velocidad
double
de aumento
exponential curve.
aumenta. Es una curva doblemente exponencial.
We see that a technology,
Que una tecnología,
when it's first exploited,
cuando primero se explota,
it means a quantum increase over the previous technology.
significa un cambio cuántico, incremento cuántico sobre la tecnología anterior.
With every new technology,
Cada nueva tecnología,
when we first discover it,
cuando primero se descubre,
it's not really implemented.
no se implementa realmente.
For example, cell
Por
phones.
ejemplo, el teléfono celular.
When cell phones first came out, only a few people had them.
Solo pocos los tenían.
And they were big and heavy.
Y eran grandes y pesados.
Yeah. But then,
Pero después,
something happens right in here
algo sucede aquí.
when the curve gets really steep,
La curva se inclina mucho,
which is called integration.
que se llama integración.
Another thing that you can call it is an enabling technology.
O también se le puede llamar tecnología que
With,
habilita.
with cell phones, it's when they became small and light and cheap,
Cuando ellos fueron baratos,
then suddenly everybody wanted them.
entonces todo el mundo los quería.
Okay, so at that point, boom, it goes very high,
Llega a un punto muy alto,
but then something happens. It reaches a limit.
algo sucede, llega a un límite.
But what happens is,
Pero lo que sucede es
one technology
una
is
tecnología
superseded by a new technology.
sobreimpone
And when that reaches the top of the curve, a new one comes along, and then another one, and another one, and another. And each time,
cada vez
more people are involved,
más gente,
more energy is involved,
más energía
a greater degree of change
y una mayor velocidad de cambio
is involved.
está involucrado.
So the message of all of this is that change is speeding up,
El cambio se está acelerando también.
politically, economically,
Políticamente, económicamente,
even the weather is
en
changing,
el clima,
the climate, in every area of life.
todas las áreas de la vida.
So this is not just a phenomenon of
No
technology.
es solo un fenómeno de la
It's a
tecnología,
phenomenon, a general
es un
phenomenon.
fenómeno general.
This is called the time wave.
Esto se llama la ola del tiempo.
And this was generated from an analysis of the Mayan calendar.
Se genera de un análisis del calendario maya.
This is time.
Este es el tiempo.
This scale represents change.
Representa el cambio.
What is change?
¿Qué es el
It
cambio?
means something new.
Algo nuevo.
So as we see in the beginning,
Como
there was little
al
change.
principio había poco cambio.
Here there is almost zero change.
Casi no hay cambio.
Then change begins to increase slowly.
Incrementa el cambio lentamente.
Then we have more change.
Pues hay más cambio.
Then here we have
Y después aquí
very, very severe changes.
tenemos cambios severos.
And finally, the rate of change goes right through the roof.
El cambio se va al techo.
Now, if you take this is a length of time of about 27,500 years.
Esto es una longitud de tiempo como de 27,000 años.
And we don't know much about this
No sabemos
period of time
mucho de este periodo
because something happened.
porque algo pasó.
This is what happened.
Esto es lo que pasó.
This peak
Este pico que
represents the last big singularity.
la última singularidad
This happened about 5,000 years ago.
y sucedió hace 5,000 años.
You can see if this scale is
Pueden ver
27,000
esta
years,
es de 27,000 años.
then this is about 5,000 years ago.
Este último pico es hace 5,000.
We don't have any records in the Western world
Tenemos
older than
registros
5,000
del
years.
mundo de Occidente más antiguo de 5,000 años.
The Jewish scriptures go back about that far.
Judías es hasta donde
So
llega.
do the writings of the Chaldeans.
Lo mismo de los caldeos.
But nothing older than that, except
Más,
the Vedas.
excepto los Vedas.
Yeah. Now, what do we know about this area of history
¿Qué sabemos de esta época en la historia?
in the West?
En el occidente
We have a story called the Tower of Babel.
tenemos una historia que se llama la Torre de Babel.
They wanted to have heaven without God.
Querían tener el cielo sin Dios.
Now, what does that remind you of anything?
¿Les recuerda de algo?
Huh? How about our civilization today?
Como nuestra civilización ahora.
Yeah, they want to have heaven, all the enjoyments of heaven, without worshiping God.
Sin alabar a Dios.
So, guess what's going to happen?
Adivinen qué es lo que va a pasar.
The same thing. What is chaos?
¿Qué es el caos?
Too much change, right?
Significa mucho cambio.
Too
Demasiado
much
cambio.
change. Nobody can handle it.
Demasiado cambio que ni siquiera
Everything
se
becomes
puede
confused.
tolerar. Todo el mundo se
Huh?
confunde.
Now, if we look at the society today, what do we see?
Ahora, ¿qué es lo que vemos?
Families breaking up,
Familias se separan,
people going crazy with guns,
vuelve loca con pistolas,
wars for no reason,
guerras sin razón,
so many crazy things happening.
cosas.
It's the same kind of situation.
Es el mismo tipo de situación.
Now, I'd like to show you another graph
Quiero mostrarles otra gráfica
of this period
de este periodo
right here.
que está aquí.
This is the date,
Esta es la fecha.
and this is the rate of change.
Esta es la aceleración en el camino.
Again, this is an exponential graph.
Es una gráfica exponencial.
So you see what's happening. We're right here,
Estamos aquí.
and we're dealing with a very high rate of change, but it's kind of stable.
Una proporción de cambio fuerte, pero estable.
However, we see that in
Sin embargo, vemos
August of
en
2010,
agosto del 2010
we're going to hit another peak.
vamos a llegar a otro pico.
And then this very volatile area
Y esta área muy volátil
in 2012 itself, starting April 2012,
desde abril
the change will get very, very high. And then in November,
en noviembre
it starts to go up, and it just goes up right off the screen.
y sale fuera de la gráfica.
Now, the very interesting thing
La cosa
about
interesante
this curve
cerca de esta curva
is that it's very similar
es que es muy
to
similar
the whole curve covering 27,000 years.
a la curva
Let's-
que tiene los 27,000
Let's go back to the other figure.
Veamos la otra figura.
You see?
¿Ven?
It has, if you start right here,
Empiezan aquí,
no, sorry, right about here, you have about the same figure.
patrón más o menos similar, una figura similar.
Do you see the resemblance between the two?
¿Ven cómo se parecen ambas gráficas?
This is called a fractal curve,
Esto se llama una curva fractal.
meaning anywhere you look on the curve,
Significa que en cualquier parte que
or
uno
any
ve,
scale that you look at the curve,
cualquier escala,
it looks approximately the same.
parece aproximadamente.
Cycles repeat, and
Los
time
ciclos se repiten en
is a
el tiempo,
cycle.
y el tiempo es un ciclo.
Time is fractal.
El tiempo es fractal.
This is a fractal called the Mandelbrot set.
Se llama el set de Mandelbrot.
This is the whole fractal. This is
Es el fractal
the entire
completo,
plot.
la gráfica completa.
But
Pero,
let's say we pick
digamos,
a
que
small
escogemos
area,
un área pequeña,
like right here,
como aquí,
and we zoom in on
y
it.
nos acercamos.
You see, we have approximately the same shape.
Tenemos aproximadamente la misma figura,
It's not exactly the same,
no es
but
exactamente
very
la misma,
similar.
pero muy similar.
Let's say we zoom in even more.
Ahora sí, si hacemos un zoom más aún mayor,
This is cool, huh?
es divertido, ¿no?
Where's my sunglasses?
¿Dónde están mis lentes?
Look what we got here.
Vean lo que tenemos
Look at
aquí.
that. What do you know? Does that look familiar?
¿Parece familiar?
And we can zoom in as much as we like. We still find the same thing.
Podemos hacer
Yes.
zoom hasta que queramos.
That's the Hermetic principle.
Principio hermético.
The overall shape or
La figura
figure
general
of the whole
del todo
is reflected in the
se
parts.
refleja en las partes.
We're having a very esoteric discussion about this on our online school.
Una discusión esotérica respecto a este
Yeah, unfortunately, it's in English.
en nuestra escuela, pero desgraciadamente está en inglés.
God is reflected in His creation.
Está reflejado en su creación.
Because God is this complete whole.
Dios es el completo o el total,
So He's like the full figure.
como
Huh?
la figura completa.
And then each of us is like a small reflection of Him.
Nosotros somos como la pequeña pequeña reflexión de él.
Here. So this figure would represent God,
Figura representa a Dios.
and then the tiny little replicas would represent the living beings,
Los seres vivientes,
the living entities.
las entidades vivientes.
So this is not the first time in history that people have noticed that the whole is reflected in the parts.
Esto no es la primera vez que se han dado cuenta de este fenómeno que
The Mayans
se
knew it.
reflejan en las partes.
The Vedikas knew it.
Los mayas,
The Vedikas, followers of the Vedas.
los seguidores de los Vedas,
And the Chinese,
los chinos,
the Tibetans,
tibetanos,
they all knew it. And this
todos ellos
principle
lo sabían.
was reflected in their works, such as the Vedas,
Sus trabajos,
the I Ching,
como los Vedas, el I Ching,
the Kala Chakra of the
el
Tibetans,
chakra de los
and
tibetanos,
so on.
y así.
All the ancient sources agree
Todas las fuentes antiguas están de acuerdo.
that we're approaching a singularity.
Nos aproximamos a una singularidad.
All the ancient sources agree
Todas las fuentes antiguas están de acuerdo.
that we're approaching a singularity.
Nos aproximamos a una singularidad.
What is a singularity?
¿Qué es una
A singularity
Una singularidad
is also called
también se le llama,
an asymptote. For example, in our
por
graphs,
ejemplo, en nuestras gráficas,
we had a curve that starts out like this
empezaba así
and then suddenly goes.
y al final
Energy states don't just change smoothly like
solo
this.
cambian de uno a otro
They
suavemente,
change in steps.
cambian en pasos.
The curve is just an
La curva
approximation.
es solo una aproximación.
In real life,
En la vida real,
things change
las cosas cambian
quickly.
rápidamente.
You have a stable state here,
Hay un estado estable.
then something will come along that pushes the system to a higher state,
Al sistema en un estado
and the whole thing will flip just like that.
y todo cambia de un
That's what's
momento a
happening
otro.
with the weather.
Eso es lo que sucede con el clima.
The weather
El clima
on our planet has been the same for a long time,
ha estado estable
thousands
por
of
mucho
years.
tiempo, miles de años.
But just in the last few years, all of a sudden it started changing.
De repente empieza a cambiar.
Well, what really happened
Lo
is,
que realmente sucede es
it has been changing all along, but the rate of change is very slow
todo el tiempo, pero la proporción de cambio es muy lenta.
because
Muy lenta.
the amount of energy in the system is comparatively
La
low.
cantidad de energía en el sistema es baja.
As the
Comparativamente,
amount of energy in the system increases,
conforme se incrementa la energía en el sistema,
the changes become more and more violent,
se vuelven más y más violentos,
but just as sudden.
pero igual de brincos.
So a change that would take 100 years to happen at this energy level
En este estado de energía, si tomaba 100 años,
happens in just 10 years at this energy level.
en 10 años en este nivel de
And way up here it will happen in a few days.
aquí en solo unos días.
As we approach the asymptote,
Esto se llama una asíntota.
when the curve begins to noticeably
Empieza a notablemente
change very fast.
cambiar muy rápido.
Up until that time is still part of the same curve.
Hasta antes de eso es parte de la misma
The
curva,
same laws
las mismas
are at
leyes,
work.
las mismas leyes son las que funcionan.
But because the energy level is increasing, the changes happen faster and
A
faster.
nivel de energía, los cambios suceden más y más rápido.
And then they approach
Y después se acercan
infinity.
el infinito.
Infinity is the singularity.
El infinito es lo que se llama la singularidad.
For example, a black hole is called a singularity.
Un hoyo negro se le conoce como una singularidad.
Gravity has become so
La
strong
gravedad se volvió tan fuerte
that even light cannot escape.
que ni siquiera la luz puede escapar.
Normally, light is free to go everywhere.
La luz es libre para ir a cualquier lado.
But because the black hole actually captures the light,
Se captura la luz,
it's called a singularity.
se le llama una
And
singularidad.
as far as light is concerned,
Con respecto a la luz,
it's an infinite sink of energy.
absorbe infinitamente la luz.
So similarly,
De la misma forma,
in time,
en el tiempo,
we are now at the asymptote of the curve.
estamos en la asíntota de la curva.
And we are headed towards
Y vamos
a singularity
dirigidos hacia una
of
singularidad
change.
de cambio.
It's only going to last a very short
Solo
time,
va a durar poco tiempo,
just a few weeks or
solo
months.
unas semanas o meses.
But we are going to be in a situation where change will be, for all practical
El
purposes,
cambio
infinite.
será para propósitos prácticos infinito.
I've done the astrology,
Esto es lo que viene.
and
De hecho,
it's
el análisis
really scary.
astrológico realmente es muy alarmante.
Because we only have this situation every 27,000 years.
Situación cada 27,000 años.
Nobody remembers what happened the last time
Recuerda la última vez,
except the Vedas.
excepto los Vedas.
What is the story that the Vedas tell?
¿Cuál es la historia que cuentan los Vedas?
The Vedic civilization has existed since the time of Satya Yuga.
Ha existido desde el Satya Yuga.
So for all this time, they had a virtually unbroken chain.
A través de todo este tiempo, básicamente había una cadena ininterrumpida.
5,000 years ago,
Hace 5,000 años,
something happened
algo sucedió
that interrupted that civilization.
interrumpió esa civilización.
What happened?
¿Qué fue lo que sucedió?
In the changing from a Dwarpa to Kali Yuga,
Cambiar de Dwarpa a Kali Yuga,
they lost their technology.
se perdió la tecnología.
They had a technology which was based on
Una
mantras
tecnología que se basaba en mantras
and on intelligent use of living systems.
en el uso inteligente de sistemas vivos.
So they had things like smart weapons,
Había cosas como armas
things
inteligentes,
similar to computers or
similares
robots,
a computadoras o robots,
and sources of energy
fuentes de energía
that were far more advanced
que
than
eran
our
más
civilization.
avanzadas que las actuales.
But literally overnight,
Pero literalmente de
This all
día
disappeared.
para otro todo esto desapareció.
there was a huge war.
Hubo una gran guerra,
And in this war, called the Battle of Kurukshetra,
se llama la batalla de Kurukshetra.
all the kings were killed.
Todos los reyes fueron matados.
The people who knew how to operate their society,
Sabía cómo
how to
manejar
manage their
la
civilization,
sociedad y la civilización.
all of them were killed.
Todos fueron matados.
When Krishna left this planet
Cuando Krishna dejó este planeta
5,000 years ago,
hace 5,000 años,
overnight, all their technology stopped
del
working.
día a la noche toda la tecnología dejó de funcionar.
So this was a disaster that was unprecedented in the previous, I don't know, millions of years.
Veía en los previos millones de años.
Because they didn't have their technology anymore,
No tenían la tecnología,
their whole empire fell apart,
todo el imperio se derrumbó.
and the world, instead of being under one king,
En lugar de estar en
One
un
empire.
reino o un imperio,
became broken up into many different
se
nations,
partió en muchas naciones,
each with its own language,
cada una con su propio idioma,
own customs,
propias
own religion.
propia religión.
So you can see this was the same confusion of tongues
Que eso es la misma confusión
talked about
de
in the
lenguas
story of
que
the
se habla en la
Tower of
historia
Babel.
de la Torre de Babel.
Those people thought it was a local
Esa gente
situation
pensaba que era una situación local,
because they were no longer in touch with the rest of the world.
en contacto con el resto del mundo.
But actually it was something that happened to the whole planet.
Es algo que le pasó a todo
It was
el
a
planeta.
global catastrophe
Una catástrofe global
5,000 years
hace
ago.
5,000 años.
The Dark Ages didn't start with the fall of Rome.
No empezaron con la caída de
The
Roma.
Dark Ages started with the fall of the Vedic Empire
La era oscura empezó
3,000
con la
years
caída
earlier.
del imperio védico 3,000 años antes.
This planet was part of a network
Parte de una red
which was governed by the demigods.
que estaba gobernada por los semidioses.
Since 5,000 years ago,
Desde hace 5,000 años,
this planet has been ruled by the
el
demons.
planeta ha estado dominado por demonios.
That's why everything's so messed up.
Que todo está tan degradado.
Spiritual language was made a secret
Todo este lenguaje espiritual fue hecho un secreto.
because the demons don't like
Que
that.
los
They want to
demonios
keep all the knowledge for themselves.
quieren tener el conocimiento solo para sí.
The demons have a lot of spiritual knowledge,
Los demonios tienen mucho conocimiento
but they're
espiritual,
selfish.
pero son egoístas.
They want to exploit people.
Quieren explotar a la gente.
Just look at the world,
Vean al mundo.
how it's being managed, how it's being run, who is in control, the most powerful people.
De esa gente.
They're very demoniac.
Son personas
And
demoníacas.
because of their example,
Y debido a su ejemplo,
the whole world is being led
todo el
astray,
mundo está perdido,
away from God.
lejos de Dios.
But that's about to change,
Pero esto está por
along with
cambiar.
everything else.
Así como todo lo demás va a cambiar.
Everything's going to change, including that the earth will now go back to the
La
demigods.
tierra regresará a control de los semidioses.
So some people ask, well, is there going to be a disaster?
Preguntan, ¿habrá desastres?
Are a lot of people going to be hurt or die or
¿Se
something?
va a morir o se va a lastimar o qué?
So my answer is,
La
well,
respuesta es,
how do you define a
¿cómo
disaster?
defines un desastre?
What is a
¿Qué
disaster?
es un desastre?
Isn't it when everything changes
¿Qué
too
no es
fast?
Cuando cambia todo muy rápido,
Whether it's the weather
el
or
clima,
politics or economics or
economía,
whatever it is.
cualquier cosa.
In other words, what's going to happen when change becomes almost
¿Qué es lo que
infinite?
sucede cuando el cambio se vuelve casi infinito?
Everything that can change
Todo lo que
will
puede
change.
cambiar.
What's going to happen when change becomes
¿Qué
almost
es lo que
infinite?
sucede cuando el cambio se vuelve casi infinito?
Everything that can change will change. That means the politics, the economics,
Política, la economía,
the technology. We've already seen the proof that the technology is changing faster and
ya
faster.
está
Huh?
cambiando cada vez más y más.
The scientists have a very narrow point of view.
Tienen un punto de vista
They think,
muy
oh,
cerrado.
we're driving the change.
Creen que ellos son controladores del
No,
cambio.
no, they're the effect of the
Ellos
change,
son los efectos
the
del
effect of the time,
el efecto
just
del
like
tiempo,
everybody else.
así como todos los demás.
The Vedic civilization
Civilización védica
had a continuity
tenía continuidad
of over 4 million years.
por más de 4 millones de años.
So during that time, they built up a very impressive technology.
Hicieron una gran tecnología.
That whole technology was finished in one night.
Se colapsó en una noche.
So there was nothing wrong with their knowledge.
Que no había nada mal con su conocimiento.
It was just that everything changed,
Que simplemente todo
even the
cambió,
laws of nature.
inclusive las leyes de la
So
naturaleza.
that technology didn't work
La
anymore.
tecnología no funcionaba.
It's just like, let's say, the laws of electricity
Si las
change.
leyes de la electricidad cambian,
We wake up in the morning
despertamos en la
and
mañana
nothing works.
y nada funciona.
Computers,
Las computadoras,
cameras, cars, cell phones,
teléfonos, celulares,
even the toaster,
hasta el tostador,
nothing works.
nada funciona.
Can you imagine what would happen to our
¿Puedes
civilization?
imaginar ¿Qué pasaría con nuestra
It
civilización?
would be finished.
Estaría terminada.
There would be chaos.
Habría caos.
The population would be reduced by 95%
Reduciría 95%.
just from that one thing alone.
Solo por ese cambio.
Because to change back to horse and cart technology
A la tecnología de caballo
would be an incredible strain on the whole
sería muy
civilization.
complicado para toda la civilización.
So imagine the Vedic civilization had a technology even more advanced,
Que tenía una tecnología más
and
avanzada,
it had been in place and operating for millions of
había
years,
funcionado por millones de años.
and then in one night the whole thing's
En una
finished.
noche todo se acaba.
Because the laws of nature change.
Esos
All of a sudden,
cambiaron las leyes de la
that
naturaleza.
technology didn't work anymore. So their civilization crashed.
Su civilización se estrelló.
Now, the Vedic spiritual knowledge is still valid
El conocimiento védico
because that never changes.
aún es válido. Porque es
But
un
as far
cambio.
as the material knowledge,
Pero con respecto al conocimiento material,
the technology part doesn't work anymore.
la parte tecnológica ya no funciona.
That's the nature of the material
La
world.
naturaleza
Everything
del
changes.
mundo material.
If
Todo
it
cambia.
changes slow or it
Si cambia
changes
lento,
fast,
si cambia rápido,
it's still the same. It all changes.
siempre todo cambia.
When things change too
Cuando
fast for us to
cosas
keep up,
cambian muy rápido como para
then
pasar,
all our plans are ruined.
todos nuestros planes se arruinan.
That's why the Mayan calendar and the
Por eso
Vedic
el calendario
calendar,
maya y el calendario
they all
védico,
go in big cycles.
todos llevan ciclos.
Actually, Kali means one,
Kali significa uno,
Dwapara means two,
Dwapara significa
Treta
dos,
means three,
Treta tres,
Satya means four.
Satya cuatro.
So 1 times the yuga is Kali, the duration of Kali Yuga.
Kali es
2 times the same
dos
yuga
veces ese
is
número,
the duration of Dwapara, and so
la
on.
duración y así.
These are cycles.
Son ciclos.
And this complete period is called a
El
Mahayuga.
periodo completo se llama un Mahayuga.
So 1 Mahayuga is what, about 5 million years?
Mahayuga dura como 5 millones de años.
But there are even bigger cycles.
Pero hay ciclos aún mayores.
71 Mahayugas
71
are
Mahayugas
1 Divya Yuga.
son un Divya Yuga.
10 Divya Yugas are one
De esos
day of Brahma.
es un día de Brahma
And his night is also the
y
same.
su noche es la misma.
And Brahma lives for 100 years.
Brahma vive por 100 años.
So the universe goes through all these different
El universo
cycles.
va por todos estos ciclos distintos.
Just like waves in the ocean.
Es como las olas en el
When
océano.
if you go to the ocean, you see there are little bubbles on the
Que
waves.
hay burbujitas en las olas.
And then another wave will come and scatter them all over the place.
Y los esparce por
And then the bubbles try to get back together, and then the next wave comes and smashes them
siguiente
again.
ola y otra vez.
That's life in the material world.
Esta es la vida en el mundo material.
This is the law of God.
Esa es la ley de Dios.
It's supposed to be that way.
Tiene que ser así. Está hecho para ser así.
Because if things went too smooth,
Porque si todo fuera muy bueno,
we would become complacent
estaríamos complacidos
and we would forget God.
y olvidaríamos.
Oh, we don't need God.
No necesitamos
Everything
a Dios.
here is so nice.
Todo aquí está tan bien.
It's going so smoothly.
Todo va tan suave.
We don't need to make a big effort to
No
find God.
necesitamos hacer un esfuerzo para conocer a Dios.
So, God makes these changes
Así que
happen
Dios hace que estos
by
cambios
time
sucedan a través del
to
tiempo
wake us up
para despertarnos.
that this material world is not our
El mundo
real home.
material no es nuestra verdadera casa.
We need to go back to the spiritual
Debemos
world
regresar al mundo
if we want real
espiritual
happiness.
si queremos felicidad verdadera.
See now, ignorant people who have no spiritual knowledge,
Ignorantes que no tienen conocimiento espiritual,
they somehow rationalize
de
this.
una u otra forma
Oh, we're here for experience,
estamos aquí para experiencia,
to gain knowledge.
para obtener conocimiento.
Well, but the ultimate knowledge is
Pero el conocimiento último es
everything changes.
todo cambia.
Where is the body that I had when I was 3 years old?
Que tenía cuando tenía 3 años,
Where's the body that I had when I was 14 years old?
que tenía cuando tenía 14
Huh?
años,
Even the body that I had when I was 30 years
el
old.
cuerpo cuando tenía
Ah.
30 años, ¿dónde está?
It's gone.
Se fue.
It's like it never existed.
Como si no hubiera existido.
The past is,
El
you can never
pasado
get it back.
no se puede recuperar.
And the future is not here
El
yet.
futuro no está aquí todavía.
So in the material world,
En el mundo
everything's changing.
material, todo cambia.
Just a question of when
Todo es una
and how much.
cuestión de cuándo y qué tanto.
Some things change slowly, some things
Algunas
change
cosas
quickly.
cambian lentamente y algunas cosas
But
rápido.
wherever we look, we see the same cycles of change.
Pero mientras vemos en todos lados,
If you
vemos
look,
los mismos ciclos.
you look at the bacteria in the microscope,
Una bacteria,
and they're all fighting over food and
todos pelean
territory,
por
and
territorio.
the same things going on, just on a smaller scale.
Se dan en una escala menor.
And if you look at the galaxies,
Vemos en la galaxia,
sometimes the galaxies
la galaxia
collide and they fight, and they tear off each other's stars and take them away. And
y unos llevan estrellas y otros se quedan con otras.
material world is always going to change and disappoint us.
Va a cambiar.
It's always going to ruin our plans.
Y siempre va a arruinar nuestros planes.
So the intelligent person
La persona inteligente,
concentrates his energy to find God,
su energía para encontrar a Dios.
because that's the only stability,
Porque esa es la única
that's the only security,
estabilidad.
that's
La
the
única
only safety.
Seguridad, la única seguridad.
We're here in the material world because we want to rebel against God.
El mundo material porque queremos
We want to
rebelar,
enjoy, we want to control,
queremos
we want to
disfrutar,
own
controlar,
things
dominar,
that
poseer
actually belong to God.
cosas que son de Dios.
Like the example I made
Por
last night.
ejemplo, que hice,
If I create something,
si creo algo,
then I own the copyright.
entonces yo tengo el derecho.
It's mine. I can do whatever I want. So God owns this world.
Es dueño de este mundo.
But we don't treat the world like it belongs to God.
El mundo como si fuera
We
de
try
Dios.
to enjoy it ourselves.
Tratamos de disfrutarlo nosotros mismos.
Huh? We say, this is mine, that's mine. This even persons. Well, this is my kid, this is my
Mío, y él es mi
lover or whatever.
amante, lo que sea.
See? We don't consider that all of these things and people actually belong to God.
Personas y cosas pertenecen a Dios.
So then when God comes along and says, no, I think I want this person over here,
Creo que esta persona la quiero acá.
then we suffer
Entonces sufrimos
because we're attached to something that's not ours.
apegados a algo que no es nuestro.
We can't control God.
No podemos controlar.
And we can't control what God wants to do with His
No podemos
property.
controlar lo que Dios quiere hacer con su propiedad.
But we find that as soon as we decide to serve God
En cuanto decidimos servir a Dios,
and treat everything as His property,
tratar a todo como su propiedad,
then there's no more of that kind of suffering.
no hay más de ese sufrimiento.
Or more than that, transferring our attachment
Transferir nuestro apego
from material to
de
spiritual.
material a espiritual.
Then our relationship with God is never interrupted.
Nuestra relación con Dios nunca es interrumpida.
The one thing that we can change
Es algo que
is
podemos
our activities.
nuestras actividades.
We can't change the way the world is.
El mundo-
We can't change other people.
O otras personas.
We can't change the laws of God or the laws of nature.
De Dios o de la naturaleza.
We can't overcome the influence of time.
No podemos sobrellevar la influencia del tiempo.
It's going to happen. But we can change our activities.
Podemos cambiar nuestras actividades.
We can change what we eat, how we work,
Lo que comemos,
how we
cómo
dress,
trabajamos, cómo nos vestimos,
how we think,
cómo pensamos.
what we do with our work, the results of our work,
Los resultados de nuestro trabajo
our attitude towards other people, towards God.
con otras personas.
We can change all these things.
Todo esto lo podemos cambiar.
It just requires knowledge.
Solo requiere conocimiento.
So once we have that knowledge, we have to act on it.
Ese
We have to
conocimiento,
do something.
uno debe actuar
We have to make some changes in our life.
y hacer cambios en nuestra vida.
And I know it's difficult.
Yo sé que es difícil.
I know 99.99% of most people, they do things the other way.
Las personas creen lo contrario.
I know because I was there too, remember?
Yo también estaba ahí,
I
recuerdo.
started out just like
Yo
you.
empecé igual que ustedes.
I'm not any different from anybody else.
Diferente de alguien.
So if I can make it,
Si yo lo puedo
you can
hacer,
also make it.
ustedes también lo pueden hacer.
You can realize God in this
Pueden
lifetime
entender a Dios en esta vida
through the power of His holy name.
a través del poder de su santo nombre.
See, the holy name is what gives us the power to change all these things.
Nos da el poder para cambiar todo esto.
Because we have the association of something pure.
Porque tenemos la asociación con algo puro.
When we chant the holy name,
Cuando cantamos el santo
God is
nombre,
directly present.
Dios está directamente presente.
I mean, God is present anyway,
Dios está presente.
but usually we're not aware.
Pero no estamos conscientes.
So when we chant, then we become aware of God.
Somos conscientes.
And this is called God consciousness,
Se llama conciencia de Dios,
which is enlightenment.
que es la iluminación.
I mean, I can't get over it. When I chant God's name,
Cuando canto el nombre de Dios,
I mean, God's name is just the most
es
amazing
la cosa más asombrosa
thing that I've ever experienced in my
que
life.
he experimentado en esta vida.
The holy name is just, it's so far beyond
Santo nombre es
anything you can
más
experience
allá de todo lo que
in
se
life.
puede experimentar en esta vida.
I mean, I just can't say enough about how wonderful the holy name is.
Suficiente sobre qué tan hermoso es.
But to realize all these things, you have to chant purely.
Todo esto uno debe cantar
Means
puramente,
you have to clean up your act.
que uno debe alinearse,
You have to become pure.
uno debe volverse puro.
If you become purified, then the slightest impurity will become very noticeable.
Se hace muy notable.
What was the example you gave? A smoker.
Una persona que fuma,
When we become contaminated by the material consciousness,
contaminamos por la conciencia
and our
material,
body also becomes contaminated by material substances,
contamina por sustancias materiales.
we can't sense
De
impurities.
esta forma no podemos identificar impurezas.
Actually, they don't even bother us because our body is used to a polluted
El cuerpo
state.
está acostumbrado a un estado contaminado.
But when someone becomes very, very pure,
Cuando alguien se vuelve muy puro,
I remember my guru.
recuerdo a mi gurú,
One time he was
una vez
trying to sleep in the temple,
trataba de dormir en un templo
and he couldn't sleep.
y no podía dormir.
And he rang the bell for his servant.
Tocaba la campana para
The
su
servant
cliente.
said, "What do you want?"
Llegó el sirviente y le dice que
And so he says, "There's a water dripping in the faucet.
hay un
Please
agua
turn
que
it
está
off. I can't sleep."
en el baño. Apágalo porque no puedo dormir.
So they looked everywhere and they couldn't find any.
No encontraban.
They said, "We can't find any dripping faucet." He said, "I can hear it. You have to find it and stop it." Huh? So it took 10 men searching the whole building until finally, in some closet in the back end of a dark hallway where nobody ever goes, there was a sink and one faucet dripping.
Con una gotera.
And he heard it and it kept him
Lo
away.
escuchaba y lo mantenía despierto.
Prabhupada was incredibly sensitive like
Era
that.
increíblemente sensible.
Whenever he came to a temple to stay,
Que iba a un templo a quedarse,
I remember this very clearly because I had to do it.
porque él lo tenía que hacer.
We had to clean his room
Teníamos que limpiar su
5
cuarto
times
5 veces
just to get all the smells
para quitar los olores
and contaminated things out of that room.
contaminadas fuera de ese cuarto.
Or he would come and
Y
say,
no él llegaría
"Clean this room, it smells." Yeah, yeah. Because if someone who was not clean had been in that room
estaba en ese cuarto
2 weeks before,
hace 2 semanas,
he would know.
él lo sabría.
Now I'm getting like
Ahora yo soy como él.
Someone was complaining
Alguien se quejaba.
because I said, "I don't like that cologne you're wearing."
No me gusta ese Este perfume que usas.
Yet we find again and again and again
Encontramos una y otra vez
in teaching spiritual things that
enseñando cosas espirituales.
if a person doesn't
Que si una persona
purify themselves according to these standards,
a sí misma, de acuerdo a este estándar,
they always misunderstand the philosophy.
se malentiende la filosofía.
A person needs to be pure at heart
La persona no es
to
pura,
really understand God.
no puede entender realmente a Dios.
You can hear the words, okay,
No puede
or
escuchar
read
las
the books,
palabras o leer los libros,
but to get it in practice
para tenerlo práctico
requires purity.
requiere pureza.
Prabhupada used to give the example
Se daba el ejemplo del
that
puro.
a dog is an animal in the mode of ignorance.
Un perro es un animal en la modalidad de la ignorancia.
So when you see a big dog,
Cuando uno ve un perro grande,
he may be very powerful and
puede ser
strong,
muy poderoso y fuerte.
but what does he do with that power? What does he do with that strength? Everything he does is contaminated.
Todo lo que hace es contaminado.
Everything he does is something
Todo lo que hace es
unspiritual and
algo
wrong.
no espiritual.
But a lion or a tiger is an animal in the mode of passion.
Es un animal en pasión.
So everything they do, even though they're very strong,
Sabe que son muy fuertes.
right, it causes harm and suffering to other beings.
Produce daño a otros seres vivos.
They're very lusty also.
Son también muy lujuriosos.
But a cow or a bull
Una vaca
is an animal in the mode of goodness.
es un animal en bondad.
So they are very strong,
Son muy fuertes.
but their strength
Pero su fuerza
is controlled.
es como controlada.
I know because I used to live on a farm with over 100
Porque yo
cows,
vivía en una granja con
and we managed them according to Vedic principles.
manejaban de acuerdo a los principios de
So we never killed the cows.
que matábamos a las vacas.
Each bull had his own
Tuviera
pasture
su propio pastizo
and several cows,
y varias vaquitas.
and they were very happy. When we do things according to the instructions in the Vedas,
De acuerdo a las instrucciones de
we
los
find that everything works exactly just like a scientific formula.
funciona tal como una fórmula científica.
Even though it may seem that we're being unreasonable
Aparentaría algo irrazonable,
or setting too high of a standard,
muy elevado.
we do it because we know by experience that's what works.
Sabemos qué es lo que funciona.
And if people don't follow the instructions,
Si uno no sigue las
they
instrucciones,
can't understand
uno no
the
puede
philosophy.
entender la filosofía.
They can't put it into
Se
practice.
puede poner en práctica.
So this goes back to my favorite saying,
Esto va
you get what you pay for.
original, que es uno recibe lo que uno entrega.
Somebody was complaining, why does it take so long to realize God?
¿Por qué toma tanto tiempo entender a Dios?
I think they were referring to my story about 6 months of chanting.
Se llama mi historia de 6 meses de canto.
He happened to be a doctor.
Y él era un
So I said, well, how long did it take you to become a doctor?
¿Cuánto te llevó?
10
ser
years.
doctor? 10 años.
What's more important,
¿Qué es más importante?
our professional qualification or our spiritual qualification?
Las cualidades profesionales.
You
o
can't take it
cualidades
with you.
espirituales.
All the work that we do in the material world, we can't take it with us.
No, no lo podemos llevar.
So isn't it worthwhile to put our energy into something that we can take with us,
Tener energía en algo
that's going to be with us forever,
que estará para siempre con nosotros,
that's going to determine our situation in the next life?
que determinará nuestra situación en la siguiente vida.
I'm not saying it's wrong to be rich or to be
Sea malo
successful.
ser rico o exitoso.
It's nice to have money.
Es bueno tener dinero.
It's good. It gives us facility for spiritual things.
Nos da oportunidad para cosas espirituales.
But we have to engage that,
Pero
uh,
tenemos que usar
that energy
esa energía
because it's God's energy.
porque es de Dios.
Whether we are talking about physical labor
Hablamos del trabajo,
or trying to understand the
tratar de
teachings
entender las
or
enseñanzas,
giving our time, energy, or money for spiritual causes,
dinero para causas espirituales,
it's all God's energy.
todo es de Dios.
If we engage it properly,
Si lo usamos
then we get
adecuadamente,
a spiritual, transcendental result.
un resultado trascendental.
But if we engage it for our own use,
Usamos para nuestro
then
propio
at best we get a result in the mode of
más
goodness.
que podemos obtener es bondad.
But what we see is that most people engage in passion and ignorance.
Es que la mayoría está en pasión y en ignorancia.
They take the money on Friday night,
Dinero en viernes
and by Monday morning they're broke.
y el lunes ya están quebrados.
Huh? This is most people's
Es el
life.
patrón de la mayoría de la gente.
So that's why we are concentrating on spiritual education.
Nos concentramos entramos en la educación espiritual.
Because by education, a person can learn all these principles, how to live their life in such a way that the work that we do actually becomes spiritual.
Que nos lleve a que el trabajo que hagamos sea espiritual.
Consider, for example, the communion ceremony,
Por ejemplo,
the
la
Mass.
ceremonia de la comunión, en la misa.
They have the bread and the wine,
Está el vino y el
right? And then they offer it.
se ofrece.
And what happens?
¿Y qué es lo que sucede?
It's transformed from material to spiritual.
Espiritual.
This is called transubstantiation.
Transubstanciación.
The actual substance.
La
I
sustancia
get like really ecstatic when I think about this. The actual substance is transformed from material to spiritual.
Lo material se transforma en espiritual.
Now think about it. If God can transform bread
Dios puede transformar
and
el
wine,
pan y el vino.
He can transform anything.
Puede transformar todo.
Anything. Even our own bodies can be transformed from material to spiritual if we use those bodies in the service of God.
Si usamos
According-
el cuerpo en el servicio de Dios.
According to the proportion that we
De
invest.
acuerdo a la proporción que invertimos,
We have a saying, Jesus saves,
hay una frase en inglés que dice Jesús salva,
Moses invests,
Moisés invierte,
Krishna,
pero
Krishna spends.
gasta.
Krishna spends. So our mood as devotees of Krishna
Como devotos de Krishna,
is that we spend our resources in His service.
invertimos nuestros recursos en su servicio.
And my experience over 40 years
Por más de 40 años,
is when we do this,
es que cuando hago esto,
He always replaces it
Él siempre lo reemplaza
with more.
con más.
I've seen it again and again and again.
Una y otra vez.
I mean, I literally can take it to the bank.
Literalmente lo puedo llevar al banco.
Literally. That when we use our resources for
Cuando
Krishna,
usamos nuestros recursos para
then
Krishna,
He
entonces,
always protects
Él
me.
siempre
I've,
me protege.
I've been traveling all over the world all these years. Let me see. Since 1975,
Del 75,
32 years. 30,
32
yeah,
años
traveling.
viajando.
And sometimes I worked,
Y a veces
but most of the time I didn't.
y la mayoría de las veces no.
Where did I get the money?
¿De dónde obtuve dinero?
Where did I get the travel expenses or the other facilities I
Y
need?
otras facilidades.
I can't tell you exactly. It just sort of came to me.
De alguna u otra forma llegaba a mí.
It was a miracle, actually.
Un milagro, de hecho.
Yeah. And it's not like I was preaching all the time.
Como que todo el tiempo
It's not like I was going up to people in the street and saying, hey, give me some money.
dame dinero,
I'm a great guy.
soy bueno.
I'm not like that. I'm too shy.
Soy penoso.
But what I was doing was every day chanting,
Es cantar todos los días.
studying the scriptures,
Estudiar las escrituras.
and when I found somebody who had good intelligence,
Alguien que tenía
I
buena
would tell them
inteligencia,
about
les decía
what I knew and what my
sobre lo que sabía,
experiences and
experiencia,
what they could do to help
que
to
podían
improve
hacer
their
ellos
lives.
para mejorar su vida.
So that's been my occupation now for more than 30 years,
Esto ha sido lo que he hecho por más
to
de
help
30 años,
people improve their lives
ayudar a las personas
by
a
this
mejorar
knowledge.
su vida con este conocimiento.
And I want to expand these activities. I want to be able to help more people.
Quiero ser capaz de ayudar a más gente.
We came up with a great idea last night
Es una gran idea ayer
to present
presentar
the research that shows that meditation helps solve urban problems like crime,
que la meditación
poverty,
puede resolver problemas
disease,
como crimen,
you know.
pobreza,
We were talking about hyperactivity in the children and
hiperactividad en los niños,
the discipline problems in the schools and how that could be helped by meditation and so on.
que eso puede ser
And there's research around it
resuelto a través de
confirms this.
meditación y investigación que lo confirma.
What is the cause of the problems of the body and the
¿Cuál es
mind?
la causa de los problemas del cuerpo?
It's spiritual.
Son espiritual.
Yeah. So that's the root cause,
Esa es la causa raíz.
and it will also show up in subsequent causes like mental anxiety
Una ansiedad
and
mental,
wrong ideas about life,
ideas incorrectas de la vida,
yeah, criminal activities,
actividades
drugs.
criminales, drogas.
Drugs are very, very common in our
Drogas son muy
society.
comunes en la sociedad.
Alcohol is a drug.
O el
very dangerous drug. If we could somehow present this information to the local government to convince them to sponsor some local research programs that would give us a platform for large-scale spiritual education. And not that we want to change anybody's religion, but we want to encourage them to practice the religion they've got. I mean, how many people practice all the 10 commandments? Anybody who eats meat is killing. So, anybody who doesn't engage, or at least the majority of their income in some kind of spiritual work, is they're coveting God's property. People think that the 10 Commandments are only on a human level. But no, they're about God. Try to understand. So these laws are meant for very broad application. And if we can make people understand, maybe we can reduce some of the suffering in the world. And that's going to happen through education. So education is the best thing. In the Vedic society, the spiritual education was for everybody. Everyone was expected to take courses like this. No one, especially in the upper classes of society, they were all expected to be initiated. If you weren't an initiate, you couldn't have a position in the government or in any leadership position in business, or nobody would accept. Just see how far we've come, huh? We're going to reach a singularity of change. In Chinese, they have a symbol for change. And the same symbol also means danger. And it also means opportunity. If things are going to change, how are they going to change? We can have an influence over that change. If we know that a moment of total change is coming, or even a moment of great change, where everything is going to be unstable, then we can prepare for it, and we can have a lot of influence over the result of that change. Isn't it? If we knew about the .com bubble, it's like any two guys in a garage come out of engineering school and they make a company, something.com, then they were driving Mercedes and Porsches, and even if they didn't do anything. Yeah. And then, all of a sudden, within about 3 months, all those stocks went. Some stocks reduced their value by more than 100. So if we knew that was coming, we could invest in such a way that, in fact, you can make, a lot of people made a killing on that. The insiders, they knew it was going to happen. So if we know that there's going to be a big change and everything is going to get crazy, we should be able to prepare for it so that we can influence that change. So that's what we want to do. We want to create a group of people who are aware of all these issues, who are intelligent, who can use their resources to make a strategy. We know we can't stop the change, but we know we can change things that we want. And we come out on the other side of it with a viable society. That's our plan anyway. Does anybody have a better plan? Changing our mode of activities is the way to deal with the changes in the material world. Any changes.
cual uno puede tolerar un cambio en el mundo material.
Because all these changes are material.
Porque todos estos cambios son materiales.
But spiritual things never change.
Las cosas espirituales nunca cambian.
Just like the Vedic technology.
Como la tecnología védica.
The mantras that operated that technology
Los mantras que operaban esa tecnología
don't work anymore.
ya no funcionan.
That knowledge is obsolete.
Ese conocimiento es obsoleto.
But the mantras
Pero
that invoke God
mantras que invocan a Dios
or create spiritual changes,
o crean cambios espirituales,
those mantras still work.
esos aún funcionan.
The eternal knowledge always
El
works,
conocimiento eterno siempre funciona.
no matter what changes in the material world.
A pesar de cualquier cambio en el mundo material.
Let's say, for example,
Por ejemplo,
you're out in the ocean
uno está en el océano
and there's waves,
y hay olas
huh? And you're in a little boat,
y uno está en un barquito
fishing boat or something,
pescador.
huh? What's going to happen? Every time a wave comes, the boat goes up and down and it's very unstable.
El bote es muy inestable.
Huh? But what if you're in a big ocean liner?
¿Qué pasa si uno va en un
Huh?
barco?
The big ocean liner is stable,
Es estable,
huh? Or a lot more stable than
mucho más estable
the little boat.
que la lanchita.
But the best thing of all is if we're on an island.
Si estamos en una isla,
If we're on an island,
estamos en una isla,
that's completely stable.
esto es completamente estable.
The point is, if we're established in spiritual
Si
consciousness,
uno está establecido en conciencia espiritual,
then no matter what happens in the material world,
sea lo que suceda en el mundo material,
our knowledge and consciousness remain stable,
conciencia y conocimiento es estable.
even if a big change comes along.
Si llega un gran cambio.
Because spiritual knowledge never changes.
El conocimiento espiritual nunca cambia,
It's eternal.
es eterno.
I want to impress on you that the way to deal with this time of coming
La
change
forma para enfrentar este cambio
is to become established in spiritual
es estar
consciousness.
establecido en la conciencia espiritual.
Then, even if everything
Y
changes,
aún así, a pesar de que todo cambie,
your life won't change that much.
la vida de uno no cambia tanto.
And as Ulysses pointed out,
Como Ulises dijo,
everybody has to die.
todo el mundo tiene que morir.
It's just a question of when and how.
Es una cuestión de cuándo y cómo.
So we all have to go through our own personal singularity of
Todos
change,
tenemos que enfrentar esa
where everything
singularidad
changes.
personal.
Whether it happens in 2012
Si pasa en el 2012,
or whether it happens 50 years from now,
de 50 años de ahora,
we still have to go through that total change of everything.
ese momento de cambio de todo.
And whether it comes from outside or from
De
inside,
afuera o de adentro,
we're going to be forced to change everything.
vamos a estar forzados a cambiar todo.
So spiritual consciousness is really the solution to all these
Espiritual
problems.
es la solución a este
And it's the
problema.
way that we can keep from being
Es la
disturbed
forma en la que podemos
by change in general.
ser molestados por el cambio en general.
Remember we went through the three kinds of problems?
Que vimos los tres tipos de problemas.
You want something that you don't have.
Algo que no tienes.
You had something but you lost it.
Tenías algo que perdiste.
Or you have something but you don't want.
Algo que no quieres.
Okay, three kinds of problems.
Tres tipos de problemas.
And all of those problems have to do with time
Tienen que ver con el
and change.
y con el cambio.
These are universal issues.
Son asuntos universales.
So the way to conquer time and change is to become situated in eternity.
Situarse en la eternidad.
And then we find that we have no more change,
Que no tenemos más
at
cambio,
least in our inner life,
al menos en nuestra vida interna.
because we have found the
Porque
stable platform. We found the island in the middle of the ocean,
la isla,
okay? The big boat, the submarine, whatever.
submarino.
Why did Jesus kick the money changers out from the temple?
¿Por qué fue que Jesús corrió a los vendedores del templo?
Wasn't he being judging?
¿Él no juzgaba acaso?
And how about every time that he talked with the Pharisees?
Cada vez que encontraba un fariseo,
Didn't he call them hypocrites?
¿los llamaba hipócritas cada vez?
Vipers? Snakes?
Víboras.
So he was using
Él
discrimination.
usaba la discriminación.
There's right
Hay algo bien
and there's wrong.
y hay algo mal.
There's truth
Hay verdad
and there's untruth.
y hay mentira.
If we have two cups
Si tenemos dos copas,
and one has water
una tiene agua
and the other one has poison,
y otra tiene veneno,
which one do we take?
¿cuál tomamos?
Discrimination is the most important function of
Es
intelligence.
la función más importante de la inteligencia.
So all the great spiritual personalities,
Personalidades
they
grandiosas,
had certain things they would accept,
había ciertas cosas que aceptaban,
certain things they would tolerate,
ciertas cosas que toleraban,
and certain things they would reject.
ciertas cosas que rechazaban.
This is intelligence.
Esto es inteligencia.
Spiritual consciousness
La
means
conciencia espiritual
very sharp
significa
intelligence.
Una inteligencia muy filosa.
Requires very sharp intelligence to understand God,
Una inteligencia muy
the
filosa
self,
para entender a Dios, a
consciousness,
uno mismo, a la
the soul,
conciencia, el alma,
service and love of God.
servicio y amor a Dios.
All these things require
Todo esto
intelligence.
requiere inteligencia.
I mean, sentiment is good,
Sentimiento es bueno.
but sentiment guided by knowledge is much better.
Sentimiento guiado por conocimiento es mucho mejor.
If we simply have sentiment but we don't have discrimination,
Sentimientos sin discriminación,
we can easily be misled
podemos ser fácilmente
or deceived.
engañados.
That's why we not only give knowledge from the
Y no
scriptures,
solamente damos conocimiento de escrituras,
we also encourage people to think for themselves
que motivamos a que la gente piense
and
por sí
understand how that knowledge is
misma
true.
cómo es que ese conocimiento es verdad.
There are 4 stages
Hay 4 etapas
in the realization of spiritual knowledge.
de conocimiento espiritual.
The first one is duplication.
Lo primero es duplicar.
Did you ever play that game
¿Jugaron alguna vez
where you have a secret message
el juego donde había un mensaje secreto?
and one person whispers it to the next person? Telephone. Yeah. And then by the end of the line, it's completely different.
Y al final está completamente
Yeah.
diferente.
Yeah. Why?
¿Por qué?
What is the point of the game?
¿Cuál es el punto de ese juego?
If I'm here
Si yo estoy aquí,
and I have a message,
tengo un mensaje,
and then another person is
y otra
here,
persona está aquí,
and I want them to have this knowledge,
quiero que tenga el conocimiento,
what has to happen?
¿qué tiene que suceder?
Think about it.
Piénsalo.
I have a thought.
Yo tengo un pensamiento
I have a thought in my mind.
en mi mente.
So then I have to put this thought in some kind of language.
Este pensamiento en algún tipo de lenguaje.
Then I have to deliver that language to the other person.
Tengo que entregar a la otra persona.
So now they have the same thing.
Ahora, la otra persona tiene lo mismo.
And then they have to decode that language into the same thought.
Entender ese idioma o ese lenguaje en otro pensamiento.
See, it's really quite complicated.
De hecho, es bastante complicado.
Now let's add one more step.
Agreguemos un paso más.
This person
Esta
here
persona
comes back to me and says,
regresa conmigo
is this what you really meant?
y me dice, ¿es esto lo que querías decir?
Huh? Imagine if we play the same game,
Imaginen si
Right?
jugamos el mismo juego.
and I whisper the message to him,
Digo el mensaje a él,
and then he asks, then he repeats it back to me
me lo repite a mí.
and says, is that what you really meant?
¿Es eso lo que dijiste?
And either I say yes or no,
Digo sí o no.
right? If no, then I can give the message again until he duplicates it.
Hasta que lo duplique.
The duplication is the most important part of
La parte
communication.
más importante de la comunicación.
First, we have to duplicate,
Tenemos que duplicar.
make an exact copy of the
Copia
message.
exacta del mensaje.
The next is called understanding.
Se llama entendimiento.
Understanding means
Entendimiento significa
I can think through
puedo pensar
the message
a través del
and come
mensaje,
to the same conclusion.
llegar a la misma conclusión.
If you really understand it,
Realmente lo entiendes,
you really have understanding,
realmente tienes entendimiento,
means you can think through it.
significa que puedes pensar a través del
Reasoning,
mensaje,
you can come out with the same conclusion.
llegar a la misma conclusión.
That means you have to talk over to yourself
Uno debe hablar con uno mismo
and ask yourself the question,
y hacerse la pregunta,
how is this message correct?
¿cómo es que este mensaje es correcto?
Until you yourself can understand it.
Uno mismo lo puede entender.
This is different from criticism.
Esto es diferente de criticar.
This is like sympathetic criticism.
Como crítica con simpatía.
It's not asking, well, what's wrong with this?
No es preguntar, ¿qué está mal?
It's actually the opposite. We're asking, how can this be right?
¿Cómo es que esto puede ser
How can this be
correcto?
correct? The assumption is that the message is correct,
Se asume que el mensaje es
but
correcto,
I just don't understand
pero
it.
que yo no lo entiendo.
When we receive a message from, especially from a spiritual teacher,
Especialmente de un maestro espiritual
or from the scriptures,
o de las escrituras,
once we duplicate the
una vez
message,
que tenemos el mensaje
we
duplicado,
have to understand it.
tenemos que
Means, how is it right? How is it correct?
analizarlo
How is it true?
de la forma preguntándonos cómo es que esto es verdad,
Why is it true?
por qué es verdad.
This is called understanding.
Esto se llama entendimiento.
The next stage is called contemplation,
El siguiente paso es contemplación,
especially with high spiritual teachings.
con una señal
When we finally get understanding,
espiritual. Cuando tenemos entendimiento,
we're going to go, wow,
vamos a decir,
that's beautiful.
esto es hermoso.
Naturally, our mind will become attracted to
Y
it
naturalmente la mente queda atraída,
because it's absolute truth.
porque es verdad absoluta.
When we understand absolute
Cuando
truth
entendemos la verdad absoluta,
and we can think through it with our own
a través
reasoning,
de ella con nuestro razonamiento,
this is like understanding the mind of God.
entender la mente de Dios.
And this is very
Y
beautiful,
esto es muy hermoso.
very wonderful. And so our mind is automatically attracted to this
La
beauty.
mente automáticamente se atrae por esta belleza
And we think about it all the time.
y pensamos en ella todo el tiempo.
That's contemplation.
Esto es contemplación.
And finally,
Y al final,
realization.
realización.
Realization means
Realización significa
we enter into complete understanding,
entramos a un entendimiento total,
as if it's our idea,
como si fuera nuestra idea,
even if it's coming from God.
sabe que viene de Dios.
We become in full agreement with it,
Nos ponemos completamente de acuerdo.
intellectually, emotionally, and practically.
Emocionalmente y prácticamente.
We see why it has to be that way. We understand the rightness of it, the justice of
La
it,
justicia que tiene,
the benefit of it.
el beneficio que tiene también.
And we experience that benefit in our own lives.
Ese beneficio en nuestra vida.
For example, if we hear the truth that
Escuchamos la verdad que
God is within the heart,
Dios está dentro del corazón.
the first thing we have to do is duplicate it. Oh, God is within the heart.
Duplicarlo.
Okay.
Oh, Dios está en el corazón.
Next question is,
La siguiente pregunta es,
how is that possible?
¿cómo es eso posible?
Why is it like that?
¿Cómo es que así sucede?
How can I understand this statement?
¿Cómo puedo entender esto?
How is it true? How is it right?
¿Cómo es que es correcto?
So if we approach it with that viewpoint, we may go reading through all the scriptures,
Podemos leer las escrituras
finding all the examples of God being in the heart,
de Dios en el corazón,
trying to understand it from different points of view,
entenderlo diferente,
psychologically, spiritually,
espiritualmente,
emotionally,
emocionalmente.
what it would be like to have God in the heart.
Sería tener a Dios en el
And when we finally understand the concept,
Entendemos el concepto,
we'll realize the beauty of it.
nos daremos cuenta de la belleza que tiene.
And our mind will naturally be drawn to contemplation on it.
Estará contemplando esa
Until
idea
one fine day,
hasta que un día
we realize,
lo realizamos.
oh, God is in the heart. Hi, God.
Hola Dios.
What does it mean to take care of the soul?
Cuidar el alma.
The soul is eternal,
El alma es eterna,
indestructible,
indestructible.
can never be harmed
Puede ser dañada
or by anything material.
por nada material.
So what does it mean to take care or to feed the soul or to nourish the soul? It means that we cultivate impressions of spiritual quality.
Impresiones de calidad espiritual.
Now this is something that
Esto es algo
I'm always surprised to find
siempre me sorprende.
that people misunderstand again and again.
La gente no entiende una y otra vez.
What is the difference between
¿Cuál es
material
la
and
diferencia
spiritual?
entre material y espiritual?
Tangible, intangible, temporal, eternal, manifest, unmanifest.
Tangible, intangible, temporal y eterno, manifiesto y manifiesto,
Remember earlier we talked about subjective?
objetivo y subjetivo.
Spiritual things are always
Las
subjective.
cosas espirituales siempre son subjetivas.
External,
Externo
internal,
e interno.
difference between matter and spirit.
Entre materia y espíritu.
So matter is always changing.
La materia siempre cambia.
Spirit is always the
El
same.
espíritu siempre es igual, al mismo.
We don't ever change our spiritual
No
identity.
cambiamos nuestra identidad espiritual.
But our material identity is changing all the time.
Nuestra identidad material cambia todo el tiempo.
Material truth is relative.
La verdad material es relativa.
Spiritual truth
La
is
verdad
absolute.
espiritual es absoluta.
So when we fill our minds with material impressions of the senses,
Materiales de los sentidos,
we're not feeding the soul.
no alimentamos el
We're feeding the body.
alimentamos el cuerpo.
The bodily conception of life,
Concepción corporal de la vida,
bodily identity,
la identidad con el
and
cuerpo
activities and so on.
y las actividades así.
But when we fill our minds with
Cuando llenamos nuestra
truths that have impressions that have these qualities,
mente, impresiones que tienen estas cualidades,
that's spiritual truth,
eso es verdad
absolute
espiritual,
truth.
verdad absoluta.
That is called feeding the soul
Eso es lo
or
que
caring
se
for the
llama
soul.
alimentar el alma o cuidar el alma.
We need spiritual activity,
Necesitamos actividad espiritual,
spiritual knowledge.
conocimiento espiritual.
We need spiritual impressions
Necesitamos impresiones
to
espirituales
nourish our real identity,
para
our real
nutrir
self.
nuestra verdadera identidad, nuestro verdadero yo.
When we see who we are
¿Quiénes somos?
against the background of knowledge of God,
El conocimiento o en conjunto con el conocimiento de Dios,
then we realize who we really are.
entonces entendemos realmente quiénes somos.
Our spiritual self is defined
Nuestro ser espiritual,
by our relationship with God.
nuestro yo espiritual se define por nuestra relación con Dios.
So all these things combine to take care of the soul.
Combinadas, cuidan el alma.
We need some spiritual process or
Necesitamos un
some
proceso
spiritual activity.
espiritual o alguna actividad espiritual.
What does God want from us?
¿Qué es lo que quiere Dios de nosotros?
Love.
Pero,
Well, what if we can't do that?
pero ¿qué pasa si no podemos amarlo?
Then what?
Entonces, ¿qué?
We have to follow the rules in the scriptures.
Tenemos que seguir las reglas de las Escrituras.
Yeah. That's how we know God.
Eso es como...
That's how we come to love God.
Es como llegamos a amar a Dios.
Okay? What if we can't do that?
Si no podemos hacer eso,
Everybody tells me, I can't give up
todo el
eating
mundo me
meat.
dice, no puedo dejar de comer carne.
Huh? So what if you can't do that?
¿Qué pasa si uno no puede hacer eso?
He says, work for me.
Trabaja para mí.
That means giving up the results of your work
Dar los resultados de
to
trabajo
advance the cause of
para
God.
avanzar las causas de Dios.
Huh?
Apoyarlas.
Building churches, publishing scriptures, sponsoring courses, festivals,
Cursos, festivales,
all these kind of spiritual activities that benefit humanity.
espirituales
Huh?
que benefician a la
Everyone should give some percentage of the results of their work
porcentaje del resultado
for God's
de su
work.
trabajo para el trabajo de Dios.
Otherwise, our work drags us down.
Nuestro trabajo nos arrastra hacia abajo.
This is another thing that I've seen again and again and again over many
Y
years,
otra vez por muchos años.
that if someone does not
Si alguien
dedicate their work for God,
dedica su trabajo
at
a
least some percentage of it,
menos un porcentaje,
they can't maintain their
puede
spiritual
mantener
practice.
su práctica espiritual.
Over time, they'll dry up.
Después de un tiempo se seca.
They won't be able to continue the
No son
chanting.
capaces de continuar el canto.
I've seen this again and
Una
again.
y otra vez.
And if we can't do this,
Si no, uno no puede hacer
then what? Cultivate knowledge.
cultivar el conocimiento.
Not just any knowledge,
No cualquier
knowledge of God.
conocimiento de Dios.
That's the only real knowledge. Absolute truth.
Conocimiento de verdad. La verdad
Absolute
absoluta.
truth. And if you can't do that,
Uno no puede hacer eso.
there's not a whole lot we can do for you. So this is God's priorities for us.
Prioridades de Dios.
This is given in Bhagavad Gita.
Está en el Bhagavad Gita.
He says, love me and surrender to me completely.
Entrégate a mí completamente.
That's what he really
Eso
wants.
es lo que quiere realmente.
If you can't do that,
No lo puedes
it's
hacer,
okay.
Está bien, está bien.
It's okay. Follow the rules in the scriptures.
Sigue las reglas.
So that means chanting, giving up meat, intoxication, illicit sex, gambling, speculation, studying the scriptures, and so on and so forth. And if you can't do that, work for him. There's a wonderful story about my spiritual master. When he first came to the United States, he was very poor. In fact, he was homeless for some time. And he was living in the Bowery in New York. It's a heavy neighborhood, like the barrio. Yeah. So he met many other homeless men. So one day, after he got his temple and he had some disciples and things were going, he's sitting there giving class, and this homeless man comes in. And this guy's a homeless man. He's a mess. Smells bad, everything, right? He comes and he has a box of toilet paper. And he comes in the room, walks right in front of everybody, goes over to the bathroom, puts the toilet paper, and then he walks out. See you, Swamiji. And what did Prabhupada say? Did he say, "Oh, throw him out, he's disturbing the class"? No. No. He said, now he is working for God. Just see. Because he could take the toilet paper and sell it and get whatever he wants. But he didn't do that. He brought it to the temple because he knew they needed toilet paper. So even a bum can work for God. Because you can't take it with you, folks. You can't, but you can take the spiritual merit that you earn. So even if you can't do this, you can't work for God, then cultivate knowledge. Because by cultivation of knowledge, you'll realize, oh, life is temporary. Everything material is going to go away. So I have to cultivate spiritual life. So I better do this, and this, and this. But if you can't cultivate knowledge, I don't know. There's not a whole lot we can do to help someone unless they're willing to at least hear.